Welcome to Ask the Counselor with Dr. Norm Wise from Living Water Counseling, located at First Church West in Tamarack, Florida. Dr. Wise is the Executive Director of Living Water Counseling and Senior Pastor of First Church West. One thing GraceNet Radio does on a regular basis is bring our portable production studio to First Church West, and we like to record an actual seminar given by Dr. Wise. This seminar is a Part 2 seminar. It's Learning How to Love. Here's Dr. Wise.
That was a breakthrough in my spiritual life, by the way, and that came even after I was a minister, and I was sitting at my table one day, and I had all the right words, I just didn't have the right heart. So I still don't have the right heart, but we're getting closer. Ephesians 4:31 and 32, let's read this together. Get rid of all bitterness, passion, and anger, no more shouting or insults, no more hateful feelings of any sort. Instead, be kind and tender-hearted to one another and forgive one another as God has forgiven you through Christ. I've had some people, their spouses will hear us say this and they get all upset. They said, "Oh, I don't like that. I like to have passion in our relationship." Well, I'm all for passion in a relationship. I'm just not for abuse. Passion doesn't equal abuse. So be passionate. Don't be abusive. So I don't mind passion. You can be hot-blooded, but you don't get to kill people. There's stuff like that. So notice we're supposed to be working to get rid of all of those parts of what we would call argument and all that and instead, it's all based on one thing. We're to be moving to be tender-hearted, patient, kind, long-suffering, because God has already done this for us. Therefore, we should try to reflect it. Again, being images of God, mirrors of God, we're to mirror the gospel in our human relationships. And so now you say, well, what about, the atheist and agnostic, because they're made in the image of God, God in his common grace may still give them the ability to love people. They may have storge very strongly. They may even have agape in the fact that they may serve other people. They may have all of that, see. Because the image of God, the good news is God did not take the image of God away from people, because if so, we'd be living in a much worse world. If he had, totally stripped the image away, then we would be afraid to leave this building because, we'd be afraid, in fact, to be with each other in this room because, that was about what happened in the days of Noah when it says the evil man's heart was evil continually. God started to restrain. He pulled us in to where he doesn't allow people to go, normally that far out. Can unbelievers, even radical unbelievers, still reflect the image of God? Yeah, by the grace of God, they can. In fact, when people stop reflecting that, that's when we see some of the more monstrous things like Adolf Hitler and so forth come into history. The question isn't how can there be an Adolf Hitler? The question is why is not every ruler Adolf Hitler? And the answer to that is not because of the goodness of human beings, but because of the grace of God. So this verse, Romans 15:7, is very critical and very powerful. Now, in a marriage situation, I would say the reason most marriages are not working well is because they're not based on Romans 15:7. There's no gospel in most marriages. There's only law, and it ends up with everybody condemning. Occasionally, a spouse will self-condemn, but that's not good either, by the way. Because if they just self-condemn, they're not under grace. They're still just placing themselves. We can put ourselves in our own hell by our own self-condemnation. That's called depression. When I look at myself and I judge myself, even can be right, but I judge myself even rightly, although some of our judgments may be too harsh, and I send myself to my emotional hell, that's depression. And what I have to say to my conscience is, listen, the blood of Christ was good enough for the all-holy God. It is good enough for you. Because you see, the only way to be in right relationship with ourselves is to accept ourselves, even as Christ has accepted us. By grace alone, by love alone, by mercy alone. Do you know God is just as much in love with you today, and just as much in love with me today, as he will be when we go to heaven and we have our act together? He's not going to love us anymore. You and I are in heaven 10,000 years. We haven't sinned for 10,000 years. Won't that be glorious? We will, finally be free of all of that bad stuff. But then we'll know that on the worst day we had in this life, you know that worst day, the one you tried to forget? That worst day we had in this life, God loved us with all of his heart on that worst day as much as he loves us on the best day we have in heaven. Because, see, he didn't love us conditionally. He loved us unconditionally. That was a breakthrough in my spiritual life, by the way, and that came even after I was a minister, and I was sitting at my table one day, and I had all the right words, I just didn't have the right heart. So I still don't have the right heart, but we're getting closer. Ephesians 4:31 and 32, let's read this together. Get rid of all bitterness, passion, and anger, no more shouting or insults, no more hateful feelings of any sort. Instead, be kind and tender-hearted to one another and forgive one another as God has forgiven you through Christ. I've had some people, their spouses will hear us say this and they get all upset. They said, "Oh, I don't like that. I like to have passion in our relationship." Well, I'm all for passion in a relationship. I'm just not for abuse. See, passion doesn't equal abuse. So be passionate. Don't be abusive. So I don't mind passion. You can be hot-blooded, but you don't get to kill people. There's stuff like that. So notice we're supposed to be working to get rid of all of those parts of what we would call argument and all that and instead, it's all based on one thing. We're to be moving to be tender-hearted, patient, kind, long-suffering, because God has already done this for us. Therefore, we should try to reflect it. Again, being images of God, mirrors of God, we're to mirror the gospel in our human relationships. And so now you say, well, what about, the atheist and agnostic, because they're made in the image of God, God in his common grace may still give them the ability to love people. They may have storge very strongly. They may even have agape in the fact that they may serve other people. They may have all of that, see. Because the image of God, the good news is God did not take the image of God away from people, because if so, we'd be living in a much worse world. If he had, totally stripped the image away, then we would be afraid to leave this building because, we'd be afraid, in fact, to be with each other in this room because, that was about what happened in the days of Noah when it says the evil man's heart was evil continually. God started to restrain. He pulled us in to where he doesn't allow people to go, normally that far out. Can unbelievers, even radical unbelievers, still reflect the image of God? Yeah, by the grace of God, they can. In fact, when people stop reflecting that, that's when we see some of the more monstrous things like Adolf Hitler and so forth come into history. The question isn't how can there be an Adolf Hitler? The question is why is not every ruler Adolf Hitler? And the answer to that is not because of the goodness of human beings, but because of the grace of God. Okay, we had several questions that really dealt with the issue. See, human relationships are going to be with real people. By the way, if you find yourself cold towards people, this may not be a bad thing to do. Remind yourself of the wonderful part of people. People you're finding yourself getting angry with, it might be important for you to remind yourself of all the good things God put into them. However, everybody that you will love and everybody that loves you is a wounded soul. And the problem is wounded souls then are struggling. And they're struggling with some emotions. They're struggling with some outlooks. They're struggling with stuff. And we can call that baggage. But everyone that you let into your life and everyone that lets you into their life, you see, because you're wonderfully made, but you're wounded too, we bring the impact and the effect of those wounds into our universe once we let them into our life. And they're weak. By the way, too, you're weak too. I'm weak. We're all weak, sometimes in different areas. So they're going to have really bad days some days. They're going to totally fumble the ball some days. They're going to just really blow it entirely some days. Have anyone noticed this is true in your human relationships? The only thing I'm telling you, don't be shocked. Don't say what went wrong. Nothing went wrong. We're east of Eden. This is people. And by the way, also remember, you are people. And every single person you love is wicked. They're a sinner, and sinners hurt people. Sinners say things they ought not to say. They do things they ought not to do. They have attitudes that stink to high heaven. literally. And unfortunately, so am I. I'm wicked. So sometimes I'm going to say the things I ought not to say, and I'm going to do the things I ought not to do, and my attitude stinks to high heaven. And sometimes we're just wild. People will do the darndest things sometimes. They will just totally surprise you. Sometimes they totally surprise you for good. They just do something crazy. You know, I had a guy who was at work, and he didn't think the people at work liked him. Yeah, I know the rest of you have never had that problem. But he was working, and he was saying, boy, I got to get myself a new job because these people don't appreciate me. They don't like me. He had that whole self-talk. He was feeling abused and miserable and everything. And they found out that he has a strange hunger and thirst for Girl Scout cookies. Everybody has to like something, right? And there's a lot of those cookies out there, so I guess a lot of people like Girl Scout cookies because they sell a ton of them.
The boxes are smaller.
Oh, there you go, smaller, there you go. So he came to his desk, and he was in his usual, woe to me, I have a job. By the way, I keep reminding him there's another thing. Woe to me, I don't have a job. See, that's a different type of woe. But anyway, he was going to his desk singing the woe to me, you know, I have this job. And there were 12 boxes of Girl Scout cookies that his coworkers had bought for him to say how much they appreciated him. And suddenly, that was a wild moment. That wasn't expected. That totally contradicted the whole story. He thought he had read everybody's mind perfectly well. He thought he knew exactly what it was. Had another guy, he was at work, and he and another coworker had a confrontation, and he started to tell a whole group of stories about her, you know. And then he came in the next day, and she said, listen, I'm really sorry, you know, I was just having a really bad day. And well, you see, he had built it in her mind that this was the Antichrist in female form. And now the Antichrist was confessing her sin. Just disturbed the whole. Now also, the thing is, sometimes people do wild things in really bad ways. You know, there's this thing of lack of impulse control, and so somebody just does something absolutely crazy. They're really, really off the scale. They say things that are just unforgivable, and they do things that are unforgivable, and they just, you know, they've never acted that way before. I wish I could tell you, I can't give you a safer world than I have. And this is my world, and these are the people in it. And this is me, and this is me in it. So you may want to look for that other seminar because this is the best we got, okay? Everyone in your life is wonderful. See the image of God. Everyone is wounded. Pray for them, and you know, the closer your friendship, the more they may tell you about those wounds. Everyone's weak, going to have weak moments when they are not at their best. Every one of them is able to sin, and you understand when I'm saying this, remember you're also talking about yourself. I am wonderfully made, I am wounded, I am weak, and I am wicked. And we will improve when we see Jesus. The wicked will wipe out, and the woundedness is gone, and the weakness is gone. And the only way we're wild in heaven is in a good way, okay? But this is who we are. And I have to say, not the ideal world. We're not in heaven yet. This is not Eden. This is east of Eden. This is a very messy and hard place. God the Son, who comes, the Son of God, comes here, and the people in his life are wonderful, and they're wounded, and they're weak. Peter. They're wicked. Judas. And at times they are very wild. Crucify him. So even the Son of God doesn't get to walk through east of Eden without all that. Now, why do you think you would? That's because you watch American commercials. And you know if you buy enough stuff, then you don't have to worry about any of that because, you know, if you spray yourself with the right stuff, people love you all the time. And all the wickedness that people, that is an illusion, okay? And it's the American illusion. You need to let that go. Welcome to my world. It's the world you live in too. See, we want to figure out what reality is and adapt to it. So, two sobering truths. Read this one with me. Every human being I love, east of Eden, will hurt me. And every human being east of Eden that I love, I will hurt. This is what it means to be a sinner. So love relationships are going to be painful east of Eden. They are painful for God. God is grieving. We wound his heart. And he's perfect. And yet, you see, when I decide to love, when I say I'm going to love this person, I'm also saying I will allow this person to hurt me. Because you see, I've put them inside the inner circle, inside the walls. And the harder thing is to say, they've decided to love me. Oh, Lord, help me. I'm going to hurt them. Because you see, I'm not perfect yet, and sin always has a negative impact. But you see, that's the cost of loving. And we can't fulfill our destiny unless we love. There was, in fact, a time, there was that song by Simon Garfunkel that said, I am a rock, I am an island, my poetry and thy books perfect you. And that was coming out about the time of 8th or 9th grade or whatever, when I was in high school, or I guess it was high school, maybe it was 10th grade. The teacher put up on the board, no man is an island. And I went up and took the chalk and put, Norman is an island. So at that point, I was voting for solitary confinement over all, because, loving had hurt. I mean, it had been a painful life by that time. I was ready to call it quits. But God, in his mercy, he has pulled me off my island. Read this. Our sins can be forgiven, but the impact, damage, and harm they bring remains. Now, this is reality. Forgiveness is great. And sometimes God will restore what has been broken. But one of the hardest things to simply live with is sometimes the impact of our sins remains in people's lives. I mean, it isn't fixed. And sometimes the impact of what other people did to us remains. And I believe we can get some substantial healing, and we can pray for God to move in. But I think in some ways, forgiveness relieves us from the fear of judgment. But one of the reasons we should hate sin is we have to start waking up, and it isn't bad. Make a list of all the sins of your life. I know you think that's crazy, but go ahead. It's different anyway. And by them, say, I was self-centered in this relationship. And next column, I am forgiven in Jesus Christ for this selfishness. The impact, this person never knew how much I did love them because I never communicated it. Because you see, the only thing that will have you hate sin is when you realize how much it's hurting other people. And by the way, ultimately, how much it's hurting God. Because God is hurt by every sin. It hurts his heart. The reason, quite honestly, counseling has helped me hate sin. Because people come and tell me sad stories about 7 or 8 hours a day. They also tell me about the consequences of either sin of others on their life, or their sin on the lives of others, or both. And many times, people, after a day, they'll say, how you doing? I said, you'll hear, I have different reactions to this depending on the moment. I usually try not to just say everything's fine, because that's kind of a cop-out, So I would say, well, we should never have left the garden. Because at that moment, the reality, the insanity, the pain, the destruction, the weight of this sin is real clear in my soul. Unfortunately, I don't always maintain that. May God have mercy and give that to me constantly. But yeah, when you really see this, sin always promises us a party, and it's really sending us to prison. Sin is always offering us a party, and it's really giving us a prison. And not a nice prison. So we have to understand that. Now you say, well, but you see, that's just it. If you cut yourself off from everyone, you cannot fulfill the purpose of God's creating you. You were created to love. And therefore, this is the challenge. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. And there's times when you need to take a step back, take a breath. I say give yourself a mental health day, a soul health day. Spend some time with God. Ask God for the courage, to deal with that. Also, we have a boundaries class. So the other side, it's hard to bring everything into one seminar. So you can get my tapes on boundaries. There is a time. The most loving thing I sometimes can do is set a boundary and say no to someone. Love does not always say yes. In fact, sometimes by saying yes to a person, we are in fact showing a lack of love. So in all this, it's very hard for me to bring in all the balances we might need to bring in, but understand, that's here. We have right now 35 different topics in our seminar series, and there'll be new ones added each year. And if you have, by the way, an idea of a seminar you think might be good, just call the office here and give it to them, because they'll remember it. I won't. You can tell me, and I might remember it, but if you tell them, they'll remember it for sure. They write it down. And so, we're trying to talk on things that would be meaningful to people and stuff. We're trying to make these seminars practical. So now you read this one out loud. I must accept the risk of love to love. And all love is risky, east of Eden. Tell you another key. So often we'll do a relationship, and the relationship has a sad ending. And sad ending can be because of death. Death is a sad ending. It can be because the other person just ends the relationship. Had a best friend. One day he was my best friend. 2 months later, wouldn't talk to me. That's painful. See that? Bad ending. What I used to do, I had another 3-year, wonderful, wonderful, close soulmate, gone. Lots of stuff. See, I've learned to the school of hard knocks. I'm trying to hope to have you guys not learn the same way. Experience is the best teacher, but it's also the most expensive. So you better actually learn through something like this than learn the way I learned most of my stuff. So what do we do? Well, I used to, when it came to the sad ending, I took the emotional toilet bowl, and I took the entire history, could be decades, and I flushed it down the toilet because it had a bad ending. Again, one of those aha moments in my life. There's no rule that says I have to flush any of that down the toilet. Because now what I do, if I have a good day with you, I put that in a Ziploc bag. Because you see, regardless of what might go bad tomorrow, it doesn't take away the goodness of today. So parents, you had a good day with your children. They were 10 years old. Put it in a Ziploc bag. 25, oh my goodness, what in the world has happened? They hate me. Well, you see, it doesn't do away with the good day you had with them at 10. Okay? Had that wonderful day, and we got in the boat, and we couldn't find, the bridges were closed, and we took a boat to get across, the little water there to get over to Las Olas, and we had that whole thing. Ziploc bag. Fact that it ended later in, relational Armageddon does not take away, you see? So I started putting in the Ziploc bags. And that way the risk goes down, because the risk is this may end badly. But you see, every relationship, if it ever had a relationship, it does have good moments, doesn't it? And I can save them. There's no rule that says I have to lose those. Anyway, that's one of the ways that I learned to accept this risk, and it becomes a little bit less risky. Still risky, but a little bit less risky. Okay, how do we get this love going? Our love is controlled by your story. We can demonize the people in our lives. This is usually what happens. I know when you married me, you were just really looking for a maid. And now it was absolutely clear to me, you never loved me. You never had any concern for me. You were always plotting to simply make me your carekeeper, and you're just looking for me to do all this for nothing. And you were out to ruin my life. You were out to, from the moment you saw me, you began plotting against me. This has all been a sham. This has been a con. I hate you. Well, you see, some of us have thoughts like that to go in our head. Some of us verbalize that outside, in fact. Some of us yell that at the other person. I hate to tell you, most people are not plotting their life all that carefully. They may run over you, but they didn't even know they were driving a car. Now, there are some people that are, in fact, predators, and there are real wolves out there. But the bottom line is that once you start going into the every and always, and by the way, see, your subconscious reacts. We use big adjectives and big words to create big emotions. Talked to a young man, and he had had a bad day, got suspended from school unjustly. Unjustly. Because he knew who really did it. And he wasn't going to be a rat. But then when he saw the rat in school, he confronted the rat with not ratting on himself because why did I have to pay for your stuff? And he just got laughed at. Why, better you than me, buddy. I don't get suspended. And so that built up energy, and he began vocalizing. And so by the time he saw me, you know when counselees are mad, when you haven't said anything, and they're sending out the signals, I'm going to kill you. Must not be me at that moment, must be something else. So he told me his wail of all. And he started to talk about it. I said, what are some of your, what we call in Family Life Skills, life commandments? So he got thinking about that, and he said, everyone is out to get me always. Oh. So we started talking about that. I said, do you believe that really? I only say that to myself when I'm really mad. So when you're really mad, you say to yourself, everyone is out to get me always. That cools you off? Well, no, that makes me more mad, because it makes me more scared, and it makes me more so. And he's not a runner, he's a fighter. So he's going to take that energy and make other people pay for that. So I said, well, what if we changed it? I taught him some logic. What if you say, some people sometimes are against me, and some people sometimes, and I asked him to put in the adjective, are out to please me. He chose that word. By the way, his language is more important to him than my language. I just echo it back. And I said, so instead of saying this, just say, sometimes people are out to get me, and sometimes people are out to please me. I said, can you imagine a time when someone aimed to please you? He says, yeah. I say, okay, now I want you to close your eyes and just think of that moment. And he did. And then we went through some breathing exercises, and he said, this is weird. Why? I'm not angry anymore. I've been angry for 8 hours. I said, because you changed your story. You now, by the way, this is more realistic. I didn't ask him, Pollyanna. I didn't say, all people are out to please me always. Bleep, false, crazy. Yeah, I'm not asking Pollyanna. I don't agree with my positive thinking friends who are saying, the world is perfect, we're in Eden. No, you're not, okay? But I am looking for realistic thinking. And realistic thinking is we're not in hell. We're not in hell. There's always some light in the darkness. There's always some good mixed in with the bad. There's always those who are for us as well as those who are against us. And so now you see, some does not create as strong emotions as all. And understand, depression, by the way, depends on this. Depression needs to be fed by an absolute language. There is no hope. It's not like there's 51% chance my life will not work out. Can't get depressed on that. You know, you have to tell yourself, absolutely. One of the big insights for me, I understood finally. I used to be able to foretell the future. Oh, I was a prophet. My wife would take me to parties, and I had studied all the, government, all the news and sociology and everything else. And I would paint a picture of the future. It was, Armageddon, hell on earth, tomorrow. And I could cause an entire group of people in the room to be depressed. I was a depression generator. I was like that guy in, the thing where they have that thing where the guy, always has a cloud and stuff around him. I could do that. And she would take me out and says, it's so much fun to take you to parties, Because my wife, well, she had much better perception. And suddenly, after a while, though, I found out, because, you go to parties with the same people over a few years, and so I had a reality check. 5 years ago, I told them that today we would be really in a worse place than we are today. My prophecies weren't coming true. And by the way, I don't know if there's anything wrong in my analysis, because I see God many times makes things work out better than we think they will work out. So I came to this conclusion. You know how much I know about the future? 0. I don't know. I have found out that usually my worst predictions, now again, you're talking to a guy, I was attempting to commit suicide when I was 7. So you can get a little bit of an idea about, I know about depression. I know what it is to feel depressed. But basically what it is, it all had to do with my prediction that my life would have no meaning, no purpose, and bring no good result. And so you see, God could have another plan, and God could do something else. See? So just be careful about predicting the future of yourself or another person, because you don't know. If you had known Saul while he's persecuting the church, you would not have predicted, oh, this is going to be the great writer of the New Testament. No, you would have your prophecy on the Apostle Saul would be totally dark. This guy's going to, the church may not survive Saul. How are we going to handle this guy? And God intervened, and he turned Saul into Paul. And who could predict that? Nobody did.
And you're listening to a special Ask the Counselor seminar series with Dr. Norm Wise from Living Water Counseling right here on GraceNet Radio. We hope you're finding this segment helpful. Learning How to Love, Part 2. We have many seminars at First Church West, so feel free to visit the website, and you can take a look at the subjects ranging from anger management to improving communication skills to fixing marriages, and be sure and tell your friends about it too. livingwaterchristiancounseling.org. Now, while you're talking to your friends, be sure and tell them about another internet opportunity, gracenetradio.com. And we're happy to produce these sermons for Dr. Wise, gracenetradio.com. And be sure and tell your friends about that too, and tune in on the internet. Here again is Dr. Wise.
So just be careful about having your it's one that, see, Jesus said, do not worry about tomorrow, because you don't know anything about it. And today is hard enough. It will take everything you've got to live well today. Let God hold tomorrow. And of course, this is a mental discipline, because we get strangely a security knowing things will go bad. See, we figure at least we know, but we don't know anything. We know 0. If Jesus comes back today, he's most likely going to surprise most of you. Say, wait a minute, that wasn't really supposed to happen. We just talked about that on Sunday, but we don't really expect that ever to really happen. So we can tell another story. We can tell a story that inspires compassion, care, and empathy. Hon, I know that you weren't really expecting, when we got married, things to be so complicated, and I know that the weight of taking care of the kids and the home is a lot heavier than you ever anticipated. And I know it must look at times like I was not really thinking carefully when we got married about how hard this was going to be for you. And it's right. I didn't look, I didn't count the cost. I didn't, I just didn't really count this in. I didn't think about your side, and I apologize for that. I was really not there. But I want you to know something. You're feeling right now overwhelmed matters to me. And, I want to work with you to find some new answers. I can't tell you I know what the answers are. But I want you to know I'm with you. And I want to pray with you about this, and I want you to know that my heart is with you, that I care for you, and I'm so sorry. I feel great pain over how you're feeling right now, so overwhelmed. Now that story I just told was the opposite story of the first story. Very same circumstances, very same people, different story. And when that person not only tells that story to their spouse, but they tell that story to themselves, their subconscious creates a whole different group of emotions. If you want to love God more, tell yourself a great story about God. Make a history of every time God has ever come into your life, every time that God has ever answered a prayer, every time that he gave you strength when you thought he never would. Go into what I recommend in my, read the gospel from, all the way through and just let it be a story to you. Catch a vision of the love of God on the cross. Because you see, you can't will yourself to love God, but you can will yourself to listen to a story. You can expose yourself. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. You can also decide to interrupt, debate the negative stories. And so when that voice comes in and starts saying, everything you do is really being used against me, you stop yourself and say, that's not true. Today wasn't a great day for this person. This person did hurt me, but just 2 weeks ago, this person was here for me and really cared about my issues. And, that person 2 weeks ago was really there to pray with me or whatever, see. So what it is, you confront those absolute statements, that black and white thinking, and you also having empathy. Yeah, I know my friend is wonderfully made. In fact, start counting up their virtues. I tell people who are if they want to improve their relationship with someone, make a list of all their strengths and virtues and read it to themselves 6 times a day. And I don't have to tell you to talk about their wounds, their weakness, their sins. You do that automatic. You don't need any, help with that. But just keep reading to yourself the lists of their virtues, who they are. Be amazed at how that will lower your negative feelings towards them. So you see, it's all in the story. We are storytellers. Human beings love stories. That's why, in fact, the entertainment industry goes so well. We love to go listen to a story, see a story. We're anxious for stories. By the way, be careful what stories you expose yourself to, because some stories will create in you noble and great feelings, and some stories would create in you horrible. No human being in your life is a demon. They're one made in the image of God. So if you start looking upon them as a demon, that's not the whole story. No one in your life is God. This is back to our codependency talk. And if you have turned someone into an object where they have no faults, and they're not wounded, and they're not weak, and they're not wicked, and they're not sometimes wild in a negative way, you're not loving that person. You're loving the ideal of that person that's in your head. You've created that person. See, the worst enemy to a real relationship is the ideal relationship. And the worst you can do for a person is to love the ideal person who doesn't exist. And you can't embrace the real person who is wonderful, but who's wounded, who is weak, who's wicked at times, and is wild. You see, you have to accept the real person. with the way Jesus accepted you. Did Jesus love Simon Peter? Was Simon Peter a messy guy? Always kind of blurt out stuff, just never knew what was going to come out of his mouth. Do stuff impetuously. Here, I'll cut this ear off. That'll show I love Jesus. Okay. Well, you see, Jesus embraced him and even sought after him. Went cooked the guy breakfast on the beach to make sure they could reconcile the relationship. I mean, Jesus, he knows everything about you. He knows more about you than you know about you. And he loves you more than you even love yourself. Eros. Remember, all four loves are good. All four loves could be messed up. So Eros, you're going to focus on the strengths and the virtue of that person. You're going to make that list of virtue. You're going to review in your mind, write out letters of praise for the person. You're going to forgive the person their vices and focus on their strengths. And in marriage, you have sexuality, physical expression of love has diminished, and begin with the small, safe touches. Take time, be patient, and desire to get physical pleasure more than get it. That's just a little note. A seminar on love that didn't mention sex, you guys would want for a refund, so there you go. But it's free, but it's hard to get refunds. But learning to love. You find common interests. Sometimes you create common interests. Sometimes you seek to start sharing some part of someone's life. You work on joint projects together. My wife and I began to build our friendship because we went to the mental hospital and started to visit, teenagers there who got in trouble. At that point, they just put troubled teens inside mental hospitals. What a great policy. And we would go visit them and work with them, and we shared that concern, together. You play together. By the way, we bond by playing. Okay, so we bond by playing and working. Those we work with and those we play with, we bond with and we look as friends. Now here's a secret for married people and for anybody you want to get emotionally intimate with. You talk to each other 30 minutes a day. Your mind is set up that if you spend 1 hour a week communicating your life story to someone, you tell them your story, and they share their story, you do that for 90 days, and you are emotionally intimate with that person. Okay? That's what creates the feeling of emotional intimacy. You see the teenager, they're on their phone, and they're talking to the same person, and what's happening is through the talking, they're becoming emotionally intimate. Good or bad, the mechanism works, okay? So, you talk about the good. This is the best thing about the day. The bad, the ugly, the dreams. And when you have conflicts, which all relationships have conflicts, you become solution-oriented, and you try to find a joint solution to where both people are honored in the solution. That's what friendship does. Sorke, you focus on commitments till you have the person. You remind yourself, this is my son, this is my daughter, this is my mother, this is my father. You reinforce the bond relationship. This is my wife. Whatever that relationship. This person has been a friend with me since I was in 10th grade. Whatever it is, this is more like, these are the deep ones. And therefore, you tell yourself that they are one of your household. You remind yourself that they are a bone of your bone. In other words, you go back to the basis and the reality of that bond, and that God himself has a way ordained who's in your family. You did not take a vote before you were born. Hi, Norm. Hi. Well, here are 100 families, and I'm going to give you a resume on each one, and choose where we'd like to be born. Nah. Okay. So this was ordained kind of unilaterally by God. Okay. Agape, you see the other person as God's ministry in your life. You see him as, this is one of the people I'm supposed to show the love of Christ to. This could be your husband, your spouse, but you again look upon this relationship as part of God's will and purpose. And what you try to do is show them Christ's love in your actions and your words. You're literally in agape trying to be the gospel. You're trying to live a life worthy of the gospel in that relationship. Okay? And so in each of these things, you see, you're telling yourself a different story. You're redefining the relationship. And you're giving yourself a purpose. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Well, because this is the role I'm to have in this person's life. And you see it as part of God's plan for your life, because you see God's will for your life is to love well. I like it when we simplify things. I need things simple. I can't live by complicated things. The purpose for your life is to love well. The purpose for my life is to love well. And that, of course, means love of God and love of others. Steve?
This is like when my friend comes once a week.
Yes.
This is our,
Yep, that's your friend.
this is our meal.
That's your meal.
So I do love.
You do love. Praise God. Steve knows he loves. Give him a hand of applause. He's had awakening. Hello. Yes, when I say applaud, I mean applaud. Yeah, this is important, because this is very important, because you see, he's had a story. He walked in here, he said, I don't love. That was a lie. That was a stronghold in his life.
I'm very grateful for him.
See that? Yeah.
So
That's it.
something just like that, so simple, can be
Praise God.
love. That's good.
That's a different story.
That's good. Well, I gotta tell him.
Remind yourself this. Now, by the way, if you don't remind yourself, if anything happened here within 24 hours, you will forget where you were by next Saturday. Okay? So what you need to do is take hold of anything like what Steve had, the aha moment, because there's different aha moments. And within 24 hours, if you go out to lunch with somebody from the seminar, talk about the seminar, you have friends or enemies to call and talk about the seminar, communicate that. Because you see, when you do that, you put that, your brain goes, oh, the boss says this is important, and it puts it in a different part of the brain, and you don't lose it. What you don't review, you lose. And the key is this also, what you act upon, you never lose. If you turn what you did here into some action, you will never lose the truth you have here. Any truth turned to action becomes lifelong. So anyway, I have an education degree. Questions? Yes, there and then there. Go ahead. Yeah, you.
I am still lost in the whole idea of when you were saying when you're married and you're having your intimate moment with your spouse, how that moment is, like a part of you experiencing heaven. I had never heard that.
No,
So can you
we
elaborate
haven't.
on that? Please?
Sure. The bottom line is that God was trying to say, how would we know what would be the joy of heaven, what would be the feeling of heaven, what will be the experience of being in union, perfect union with God. He created that in the human orgasm of sexuality. When that orgasm is kept within the context of covenantal love, what we're to see is, as Christ is to the church, so is the husband and wife together. How am I to have any idea how good that's going to be? Heaven is orgasm taken to the millionth power, but it's as close as we can get this side. So you see, that sexuality is sacred. In other words, what God has done is created a mechanism by, within the context of this image of his own relationship, this is a physical parable. We're living out a parable. We actually are given a spiritual experience in human sexuality, which was intended by God to say, well, how good will heaven be? That is heaven. And this is why it has so much power in our life. Because you see, we still have a hunger and a thirst for heaven, but it's all misguided. And so our society, see, the problem is even the church. By the way, this is not new. This was taught by the Jews. The only reason the Song of Solomon is in the canon of scriptures, the Jews said this is talking about God and Israel. Well, if you read the Song of Solomon, this means they saw this. They saw then this union, communion to be one. They saw sexuality as part of spirituality, and that's how it got in to the canon. I mean, I wouldn't have put the book in the canon, but they did, and the Holy Spirit led them to do that. We look at Ephesians 5, and Paul uses the very same language. He says, Christ, he even says, you have heard it said, the two shall be one flesh. And we think we understand that verse in Genesis. And then he goes, I tell you a great mystery, this is Christ in the church. He says, don't worry about that, just love each other. You're not going to get it. But he says it in Ephesians 5. In Revelation, the bride, welcome to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And so you see all those images are all throughout. So the reality is, see, what we've done is we've taken a secular view. We looked upon sexuality as something closer to the animal world, whereas human sexuality is sacred. It's really heavenly. And literally, if we experience in that in context, and again, this is hard because there's so much abuse of sexuality and so much pain connected right now, the wounded and the wild and all that stuff. But as it would have been in Eden, what it would have reflected, and what it did reflect, was heaven coming as close to earth as it can. And so this is my sacred view of sexuality. Did that help any? Did that make, okay. So yeah, and by the way, the Puritans believe this. When the Puritans wrote on sexuality, this is not a new concept. It's just that the 21st century church, unfortunately, the only thing we're telling people, don't have sex because you'll get, sexually transmitted diseases, which hasn't worked real well, by the way, as far as an effective means. I would say we tell people, don't mess around with this sacred gift because this is so special that it has the potential of releasing great goodness in your life. I think our teenagers might have a greater reason to not fornicate. But as long as we have a low view of sexuality, we're most likely going to keep on abusing it. So anyway, I have a very high view. And so, but yeah, think about it. But yeah, that's something that I think is helpful. All right? Yeah. And somebody had their hand up back here. There we go. I'm going to walk. My hearing is not as good as your voice, so I'm heading in that direction.
I have to write mine down. On the concept of the two sovereign truths, if a person is constantly hurting someone or others with little to no sympathy and is well aware of the actions, could we say that that person themselves is lacking a need or operating in pride? And what is the encouragement that you can give for the victim of God's stand in the case?
Okay. I'll read that so they can hear it. This is good. If a person is constantly hurting someone or others and is well aware of its actions, and we say, with little or no sympathy lacking, what need of themselves for operating in, what do we do in such a case? Okay. Bottom line is, if you love such a person, people can become hard-hearted. Their conscience can be seared, calloused. And we have to recognize that. That's part of the wounds. People also can, because of the fear of being hurt, there's some people that take on wolf. The way I respond to the fear of being hurt is I become a wolf. I become a predator. And I feel safe by, I trust no one. I know you're going to hurt me, so therefore I'm going to hurt you first. This allows them to have power and control. It's their security. What's really motivating it is their fear. And they're translating their fear into anger and all this. And they also have calloused themselves because they don't want to feel, they know their conscience, unseared conscience, knows this is wrong, so they've had to sear it so they can get past the internal conflict. And this is a very dark place. First thing you have to do is you have to pray that God will break through those walls. The second thing is our boundaries, is that you have to say, I love you too much to allow you to hurt me and abuse me, so no. Okay? Because you're only, I'm not going to allow you to hurt yourself or me. And this, of course, means loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And you set a boundary and say no. So you don't allowing ourselves to be a doormat is not love. It can be codependency, but it's not love. And so we have to set the boundary. We have to pray for them still, and within the context of where we can show them safely, care, we need to do that, but we also need to make sure that we understand that we're not going to play this game. So we have to say no. I'd suggest the series on codependency, because the hard part about this seminar and that seminar is this seminar kind of leads into that seminar, because there are these predators. But yeah, there are wolves who are out to bite you, and so you need to treat a wolf as a wolf. There's a wolf in sheep clothing who has Bible verses in order to justify every time they bite you, which just doesn't change the fact they're a wolf. They just look nicer. Then there's the skunk who basically says, don't mess with me, because if you do, you'll be sorry. There's the turtle who says, oh, it looks bad out there. I'm going to hide. But all turtles live in microwaves, so they end up blowing up, and boy, is that messy, okay? And then there's the termite, who is passive-aggressive, who says, oh, yeah, sure, but really is working against you the whole time. So there's those 4 basic types, and you're talking about the wolf. Wolves need to be treated like wolves, but remember that wolf is made in the image of God. Pray for them, care for them, set boundaries, and hopefully pray that they have to have a moment of self-awareness. I mean, they need to have something that would happen. And sometimes through the, strangely enough, they want those relationships, but they want them on their terms. I hate you, but don't leave me becomes kind of the motto of these relationships because they still want connection. But the thing is, if you put up a boundary, then sometimes they begin to realize they're losing something, that their behavior is, and then that we never know what God might use. But yeah, do you have a right to protect yourself? Yes. That makes sense? Does that address it? Okay. We're going to have to let you go. The time has come. And your stomachs are growling. I hear them. I hope and pray. I do believe this. God sent you here today. This was not an accident. There are no accidents. God intended you to be here listening to this for some reason. And I ask you to ask God after this what that reason was. And then use it for good. Because the reason we do these seminars are in the hope and the prayer that God will use this to help people in their journey. So I do ask you to do that. My cards are back there, or should be back there, or Living Water information will be back there. If any of you want to contact me, or call the ministry, you can do that. We do have a seminar about every couple of weeks. I forgot to actually advertise the next one, but it'll be here. My book is back there, and for the people who came in early, you know what the deal is, and so I would say you guys move first, and then we'll go from there. I don't want to have you guys who came in here. If any of you are just looking for church tomorrow, I'll be talking on how to get back to our first love. So if you are without a regular body of Christ that you go to, we'll be looking at the passage where Jesus talked to the church of Ephesus, said, I have this against you, you have left your first love. And so we're going to talk, how do I get my first love back? So that'll be what I'll be talking on tomorrow. It has been an honor to be part of your life, be part of your journey, and we're going to close in a word of prayer. Dear Father, you realize where each person here is, and you realize too, Lord, how hard it is to love or be loved in this difficult space east of Eden. You understand better than anyone else the great complexity of our lives, of our emotions. So we come before you just asking, Good Shepherd, remember that we are but dust and so very frail. So lead us into love. Lead us to love well. For your glory, for our good, and that we might be of some good to others. Lord, have mercy. Messiah, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. And all of God's people said, amen. Go in the peace and the power of the Lord. God bless you.
And that concludes this mini segment on family life skills, Learning How to Love with Dr. Norm Wise, the Executive Director of Living Water Counseling, located at First Church West in Tamarack, Florida. If you'd like more information about attending seminars or attaining CDs, you can visit the website livingwaterchristiancounseling.org. That's livingwaterchristiancounseling.org. And if you'd like to order CDs, please include a love gift to assist Living Water Christian Counseling and helping others. At Living Water Counseling, they have classes, seminars, private counseling in person, over the phone, and via Skype. So, wherever you are, Living Water Christian Counseling can be right there with you. Marriage counseling, anger issues, faith issues, depression, and a whole lot more. There is hope via the Word of God and Jesus Christ. If you're a CD listener, don't forget to tune in to Christian radio on the internet at gracenetradio.com. And please tell your friends about gracenetradio.com. Great music, great teaching, all celebrating the greatest gift of all, Jesus Christ. Help us spread the gospel. And we thank you very much for listening. I'm John St. George.